grew up in Calgary. I was very much of a city girl. I loved the city, and Calgary was a lovely little city at the time. I could travel all over the city on the streetcar or my bike. I especially liked going to movies. I went when I was quite young. If I could get a dime from my mother, and I walked the 9 blocks up to the Plaza Theater on a Saturday afternoon, and I would see a movie. And as the time went by, I knew all about all the actors and actresses. When I got older, I went on the streetcar. There was other entertainments that came to Calgary, but I was really, really into that, and I did a lot of going to entertainments. I also enjoyed the libraries. I liked to go to the Central Library, which was at that time in the Central Park, and it was much bigger than our local library. When I graduated from high school, I had to think of what career I would have. The 4 girls who graduated from high school, the 3, or about the only careers I knew of, were to be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. I already had an older sister who was a teacher, and I visited her at her school up near Edmonton once, her rural school, and I thought maybe I could do that. And what happened, what made me decide to be a teacher at the time, in around 1948, the government was lacking teachers to go out into the country to the rural schools. And they offered students $200 for them to go and get their training and then spend 2 years teaching in a rural school. Well, that was a real bonus for me because we didn't have much money, and I was able to do this. I lived in Calgary. They had brought a branch of the University of Alberta down to the tech building. I could walk to the tech building, and I boarded at home, and of course I didn't have to pay for room and board. I enjoyed the course. It was just for 1 university year, and then I was ready to go out, or I probably wasn't ready, but it was time I went out and taught for 2 years. I managed to get a job at northeast of Calgary. After I talked to the superintendent who gave me the job, I thought, well, they'll get in touch with me. The people in that district will get in touch with me. But when the Thursday before school opened, nobody had got in touch with me. My dad felt sorry for me, and he helped me out. He and Mom and I went out, drove out. I knew where the school was. I didn't know how to get in touch with anybody there. Well, we drove out, and as luck would have it, there were some people at the school. Some of the neighbors were cleaning the school up for the new school year. I asked, I had a good chance to look around. I was really surprised. There weren't very many books. There were textbooks, but no reference books or storybooks. And there was nothing there to tell me how many classes I would, and the parents seemed very kind of vague about it. But one lady asked me if I wanted to board with her in her home, she had a couple of children going to school, and she would take me as a boarder, and I was really happy to get that straightened around. So on the Sunday night, she had told me what bus to take out from Calgary and where to get off at a certain service station. I got off at the service station. All was dark, and pretty soon a car came along, and it was my landlady, and she drove me to my boarding place. The next day I got up, and I hadn't been in the country very much. When we went to see the school, I thought it was rather, the ground, it was prairie, it was flat. Everywhere you looked was either sky or land, with little bumps where different farms were. So the morning that I set out for school, I walked along the half-mile road. I felt very exposed, and I felt almost creepy being out with nothing, nobody around, no traffic, no, I don't think there were any even animals there were crops in the fields. When I got to school, they did some more looking around, and when the children came, we did the usual things that we did in those days. First, we saluted the flag, which hung on the wall beside a picture of King George VI. And then we had a Bible reading and repeated the Lord's Prayer. That was something we always did at school in those days. Then I had to write everybody's name down in the register and figure out. I had 14 students, 3 grade 1s, and 1 boy in grade 9 who would have to write departmental exams at the end of the year. And so I knew right away where my priorities were going to be. And then somehow we put in the day. For the rest of the day, the children went home. I stayed until supper time. In fact, most days I did. There was so much to prepare that I would stay there by myself till supper time. Glad to have the time to write down lessons. And every teacher was supposed to write a plan for the next day. Well, by the time I got these grades straight and a plan for 1 or 2 of classes, I certainly had an empty plan book. I really enjoyed teaching at that school. The children were particularly cooperative. They helped me in lots of different ways. The oldest girls loved to correct the younger children's work, which saved me quite a bit of time. And then they would tell me who was doing well and who wasn't. I went from class to class, and I was busy every minute. The teaching wasn't hard. The part that was hard was living without the things I'd had in the city. We didn't have any electricity in the school. There was a whole wall of windows that let in the sun. Sometimes let in too much sun and it was too hot. We had no running water. It was apparently been decided that a boy in our class would be the janitor. He and his sisters and brothers came in a cart pulled by a horse. But that was the way they came to school. The other children were able to walk usually. And he brought a cream can full of water. And I must tell you this about him, he had cancer in one leg, and he had to have the leg amputated, and he had a one leg, and he was only about 11 years old when I knew him. But anyway, he'd haul this cream can in and put it in a crock, and the crock had a tap, and that was our drinking and hand washing water. Of course, the outhouses provided for toilets. These things weren't too bad. But the thing that really bothered, well, the I was not good at, and I never knew such a thing existed before, was the heating of the building. Down the basement was an enormous furnace. When I first started to have to heat the furnace, I would, and I knew nothing about it. Elmer, the janitor, wouldn't be there when I got to school, and I would have to start the heat. So I had to make a fire, first with some paper, then with some small sticks. These things were in the basement. Then with some larger pieces of wood. I'd usually get that far, and then I would go upstairs, because this wood had to get blazing well before I put the coal in. I didn't even know what coal was before I went to teach. When I would figure out that the wood was burning well, and by this time the children were often at the school, then I would go down and put the coal on. The coal was dirty, and it was, and it got your hands dirty and your clothes too. Now, when I went back up, I would forget all about the furnace because I was working with the children, and the fire would burn out, which meant I had to go down again. Elmer helped me because he was at school by then, and he hung on to the railings on each side of the steep stairs and kind of swung himself down the stair down. Between the two of us, we had quite a time keeping that furnace going. The next thing that I had to learn about was that the superintendent came to check up to see what I was doing, and he came several times in the fall. One time it was a particularly beautiful day, and I was letting the children stay out on the playground later, because on good days they stayed out and played on. I always let them stay out longer. They didn't have a gym, they didn't have phys ed, and I figured that this was, they deserved this. When we went, the children went out in the playground. I didn't have to supervise them. The older boys did. They usually arranged a baseball game, and even the smallest children played this, and they did it. Sometimes I went out and swung on one of the swings. There were a couple of swings in the yard. I enjoyed that, and I could see all over. And one day while I was up in the air, I saw the superintendent coming. And I called to the children to get back into the school because we should have been in. And I managed. It was hard getting myself down to the ground, but we got into the school, and the superintendent came in, And he would ask the children different things that they should have learned by that time. And I had one little boy, he was in grade 5, and if they couldn't answer the questions, he would always say, I know the teacher taught us that, but we forget. So he was looking after me, and I really appreciated him. Later on, when winter came, when the superintendent came, he would always decide that the classroom was far too cold, although none of us had particularly noticed. He would take me down to the basement and give me a lesson on making a fire. I knew how to do it, I just didn't do it right, or I didn't take the time. He would build up a great fire downstairs. Actually, I would have been afraid to have so much wood in the stove or the furnace at the same time. But he got this big fire going and then he put the coal in. The coal was, once it lit, it burned slowly and let out wonderful heat, and I've learned to appreciate coal. Now, I had a good year teaching. The superintendent came regularly and seemed pleased with my teaching, but not with my janitor work. But I did the best I could. And at the end of the year, he came and told me that the school that I was teaching at was slated to be closed because they had kind of consolidated schools in those days, or they were just starting to consolidate schools, and they were busing children into towns that had larger schools. The children in my school would be going to 3 different schools because there were 3 towns surrounding this area, and they would go to the one that they were closest to. He asked me if I would like to go to an area called Catherine. They all had a school there. It was I would have only 2 grades in one room, and it was quite a well-established consolidated school, still out in the country, but with electricity and water, and I thought that would sound pretty good, so I took a job there. But I really always enjoyed teaching. In all my years of teaching, I never did learn to write a full plan for a full day. At first I'd only get to the first recess. Later I got to the noon. I don't think I ever got a whole afternoon written down. And that's the end.